My name is Eleanor Hayes. And before this story begins, I need you to understand one thing about me. I have never expected much from life. Not praise. Not admiration. Not even gratitude. All I ever wanted was to raise my son, Daniel, in a way that he would grow into a kind, compassionate man. Someone who treated people with dignity, no matter who they were. But sometimes life has a way of reminding you that even your greatest hopes can shatter in a single, heartbreaking moment. And mine came the day my son introduced me to his boss as just our housekeeper. Before we get there, before the humiliation, the twist, and the truth that changed everything, let me take you back to the beginning. But first, if you enjoy real-life stories about family, betrayal, redemption, and unexpected justice, make sure you subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective on what you would have done in my situation. Now, let's start my story. People rarely guess it now, not with my weathered hands, my graying hair, or the tired softness in my voice. But once upon a time, I wasn't a housekeeper. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't someone people walked past in grocery stores without a second glance. I used to be a teacher. An English literature teacher at Willow Creek High School, a place filled with wooden hallways and chalk dust and the kind of youthful chaos that somehow keeps you feeling alive. For 27 years, I taught teenagers how to find meaning between the lines of a story. I taught them how to see deeper truths, understand characters' motivations, and find compassion for people they didn't yet know. Ironically, those were the very lessons life would later force me to confront in ways I never expected. But teaching didn't make much money. Teachers rarely earn what they deserve, and life is never kind enough to wait for your savings to catch up. When Daniel's father passed away, and medical bills swallowed every corner of our existence, I made a choice. I retired early, sold our home, moved into a small studio apartment, and started working odd jobs, anything I could do to help my son through college. I wasn't ashamed of any of it. Honest work is honest work. But Daniel, he saw it differently. He wanted a life so far removed from struggle that sometimes I think he wished I came from another world entirely. A world without sacrifice, without exhaustion, without the imprint of hardship etched into every line on my face. Still, I loved him with everything I had left. Years passed, and eventually Daniel married a woman named Victoria. She was elegant, polished, always dressed like she might be heading to a business conference or a photo shoot. Even when she was just going to pick up almond milk from the store. I tried to welcome her with an open heart. But she kept me at a distance, polite, but cold. Always using Eleanor instead of Mom, even though I never asked her to call me by anything more. Their home, my son's home, was a 4,000 square foot monument to success. High ceilings, glass railings, imported furniture, minimalist design. Beautiful, yes. But sterile. A house without warmth. After Daniel and Victoria had their first child, they asked if I could help out around the house. Just until we figure out childcare, Daniel had said. And maybe help around the place a bit. You're great at organizing, Mom. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was doing it for my grandson. But deep down, something inside me shifted. Soon enough, I wasn't just helping. I was cleaning, cooking, doing laundry, running errands. Quietly slipping from mother to housekeeper without any formal announcement. Just a slow erosion of identity. And then came the event that changed everything. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel told me they would be hosting a small gathering. His company was merging with another firm, and they were invited to a formal dinner at the CEO's estate. Mom, you should come, he said. I blinked, surprised. Are you sure? Yeah. Victoria insists, he added, glancing away. Victoria stepped into the room moments later, holding a silver necklace in her hand. It would be helpful if you came, she said calmly. Someone needs to keep an eye on the kids, help serve drinks, maybe assist in the kitchen. Nothing too complicated. There it was. The truth behind the invitation. I wasn't a guest. I was help. Still. I smiled and agreed. Because that's what mothers do, don't they? They bear more than they should, hoping it somehow protects the people they love. But just before the event, something strange happened. Victoria approached me in the hallway, her expression taut and controlled. "Eleanor, one more thing," she said quietly. "Tonight, if anyone asks who you are, please don't say you're Daniel's mother." I froze. Why would I not? She cut me off. "It's just complicated. Daniel's trying to make a certain impression. You understand?" I didn't understand. But I nodded anyway. My heart squeezed, and I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. This was the moment, the first real moment, where I realized what I meant to them in this house. Not mother. Not family. Not even a respected elder. Just someone who helped make their lives easier. Just someone they didn't want to be associated with in public. The CEO's home was breathtaking. A mansion that made even Daniel's house look modest. Crystal chandeliers. Mahogany floors. Art so expensive it probably had its own insurance policy. I arrived early as instructed, wearing a simple navy dress. Not fancy. Not flashy. Just respectful. Inside, people buzzed around in formal attire. Laughter echoed from the dining area, and the smell of roasted rosemary chicken floated through the air. And then, the moment I'd been dreading. Daniel waved me over. "Come here, Mom, I mean Eleanor." My chest tightened. Standing beside him was a sharply dressed man in his late 50s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to analyze everything they touched. "Mr. Sterling," Daniel said confidently, "this is Eleanor, just our housekeeper." The words sliced through me. Not metaphorically. Not poetically. But truly. Like something inside me tore open. Housekeeper. Not mother. Not former teacher. Not the woman who raised him alone, sacrificed everything, and gave him every chance he ever had. Just our housekeeper. Mr. Sterling turned toward me, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise. Recognition? He stepped closer, eyes narrowing slightly. "Eleanor Hayes?" he asked softly. My breath caught. I hadn't heard that tone, that warmth, in years. Yes, I whispered. "Do we know each other?" He smiled, slowly, thoughtfully, as if he'd discovered something precious he thought was long lost. "Oh, we know each other," he said. "In fact, I know exactly who you are." Daniel looked confused. Victoria looked irritated. And me? I suddenly felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Because in that moment, I realized. Everything my son thought he knew about me. Everything he had hidden. Everything he had dismissed. Was about to unravel. Mr. Sterling's eyes stayed locked on mine, intense, searching, almost disbelieving. It was the same look I used to see on my students' faces when a moment of clarity finally arrived, that instant where scattered pieces snapped into place. But this time, I was the one feeling unsteady. Beside me, Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, you know her?" Mr. Sterling let out a soft breath. The kind that carries weight. The kind that presses on the room without raising its voice. "Oh, Daniel," he said quietly. "I know your mother far better than you seem to." The words hit the air like a tremor. A few guests nearby slowed their conversations. They weren't listening deliberately. Not yet, but the tension had changed the energy around us, pulling attention like gravity. Daniel blinked rapidly. "My mother." I felt my throat tighten again, remembering how he had just erased me minutes earlier. Introduced me as a housekeeper. As someone disposable. "Yes," Mr. Sterling continued. "Your mother." Then he turned to me. "You were Eleanor Hayes, the teacher who ran the literature outreach program at Willow Creek, weren't you?" My breath caught. Not many people remembered that program. Certainly no one in Daniel's adult life. "Yes," I said softly. "That was many years ago." But Sterling wasn't finished. "You taught hundreds of students to think for themselves. You built the only free writing program in the district. You helped struggling kids find confidence where no one else looked for potential." He paused, voice lowering with sincerity. "You changed lives, Eleanor." My vision blurred for a moment. I wasn't prepared for that. Not tonight. Not after everything. Daniel looked at me as if I had suddenly become a stranger wearing his mother's face. "You Never told me all that, he mumbled. I swallowed hard. You never asked, sweetheart. Mr. Sterling studied Daniel for a long, heavy moment, not unkindly but sharply, like he was measuring the shape of his character. Then he said something that made Daniel pale. Your mother was my son's mentor. A ripple of shock traveled through my chest. Your son. I whispered.
You re David Sterling's father?
Yes. I nearly stepped back. David Sterling, the troubled, brilliant boy who had stayed after class for help with essays. The boy who used to leave crumpled poetry drafts in my inbox because he didn't think they were good enough. The boy who was bullied for being too quiet, too emotional, too different. The boy I had secretly worried about more than any other. He had become a best-selling author, and I had followed his success from afar, quietly proud. I had no idea his father was this man. And judging by the expression on Mr. Sterling's face, neither did Daniel. Daniel opened his mouth as if to defend himself, but no words came. For once, he had nothing to say. Victoria stepped in quickly, smiling with thin politeness.
Mr. Sterling, I assure you.
He raised one hand, silencing her effortlessly. Tell me, he said to Daniel, why did you introduce your mother as your housekeeper? Daniel's jaw clenched. Sir, it's complicated. Is it? Mr. Sterling's tone wasn't loud, yet it cut with precision. She is the woman who raised you alone, isn't she?
Daniel's eyes darted away.
More guests were openly listening now, though pretending not to. The room seemed to hold its breath. I felt humiliated, exposed, unwanted. But then, something unexpected happened. Mr. Sterling moved closer, just slightly, standing beside me instead of across from me. The gesture was subtle, but powerful.
A silent choosing of sides.
Eleanor, he said warmly, would you do me the honor of joining us at the main table? My stomach dropped. I looked around. The main table was for executives, partners, and their spouses. Not for people like me. Not anymore. Oh, I couldn't, I began. But Daniel cut in abruptly. Sir, my mother is here to help with the kids and the... Mr. Sterling turned, very slowly.
Are you correcting me?
The room went silent. Daniel swallowed hard. No, sir. Good, Sterling said. Because Eleanor isn't here to serve anyone. She is a guest in my home tonight. And she deserves to be treated as such. Heat flooded my cheeks, a mix of embarrassment, gratitude, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. I tried to speak again, but Sterling gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Please, he said, softer. You belonged at tables long before this one. As Mr. Sterling escorted me toward the dining hall, Daniel followed close behind, whispering urgently, Mom, what are you doing? I stopped, turning to him. What am I doing? I asked quietly. Daniel, you introduced me as someone who cleans your house. His face flushed. Because Victoria said, it was for professionalism, I didn't mean it like.
I raised a hand.
Stop. The word stunned him, maybe because I had rarely said it to him in his adult life. He looked like a child again, caught doing something wrong but not understanding the full weight of his actions. Daniel, I said softly but firmly, do you know how small you made me feel tonight? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't think it mattered, he whispered. And that was the worst part. To him, I didn't matter. Not enough to introduce by name, not enough to acknowledge as his mother, not enough to risk appearing less successful in front of his boss. Before I could respond, Victoria appeared behind him, arms crossed. We don't have time for this emotional scene, she muttered. You're making it dramatic.
Mr. Sterling's voice struck like a gavel. Victoria.
She stiffened. You should pray that one day your daughter never speaks of you the way your husband has spoken of his mother tonight.
Her lips parted slightly. No retort came.
The conversation ended. The dining room glowed with candlelight and muted gold decor. Crystal glasses chimed softly as guests settled in. But as I approached, a hush fell. Not because of who I was, but because of who I was with. Mr. Sterling pulled out a chair, the chair, next to his own. An executive on the left whispered something under his breath.
A woman across the table gave me a gentle smile.
A few faces carried confusion. Then, just as I thought the awkwardness would swallow me whole, I saw him.
David.
He stood at the other side of the table, tall now, confident, his hair styled professionally but still with that familiar quietness in his eyes. When he saw me, his face broke into disbelief. Then warmth. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice cracking.
I pressed a hand to my heart. David.
He moved around the table and hugged me, genuinely, tightly, the kind of embrace you give someone who once saved you without ever knowing it. People watched, stunned. He whispered, "I never got to thank you.
You changed my life."
Tears burned my eyes. And from behind us, I heard the softest sound.
Daniel's breath hitching.
Because for the first time in his life, he realized he never actually knew the woman who raised him. David held on to me for a second longer, then gently stepped back, smiling with the kind of sincerity that pierces right through the armor you do not realize you built over the years. "You look exactly the same," he said.
I laughed softly.
"That is not true, but I appreciate the kindness." "It is true," he insisted. "Or maybe it is just that I still see you the way I did when I was 16, the person who believed I could be something more than the mess everyone said I was." His words warmed something buried inside me, something I thought had long gone quiet. But behind us, I felt the presence of someone else. Daniel. He stood stiff, expression tight, as if watching an entire piece of his identity slip out of his hands. "David," he said, forcing a smile, "I had no idea you and my mother knew each other." David blinked, genuinely surprised. "You did not know? She never told you?" "Miss Hayes practically saved my academic life." Daniel looked at me sharply, confused, betrayed, embarrassed, as though my silence about my past had been a personal attack against him. I met his eyes calmly. "There are many things about me you never asked to know." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And that silence, that inability to defend himself, said more than any argument could have. The guests sensed tension.
Soft murmurs rippled through the room like delicate feathers drifting on a breeze no one could see.
Mr. Sterling stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Daniel," he said, "I think you should hear something. Something important about Miss Hayes." But before he could speak, Victoria cut in, her voice coated in brittle irritation. "Why are we making such a big deal out of this?" she snapped quietly. "She is just." She stopped herself, but too late. Everyone knew what she was about to say. And David, the boy I once taught to read the emotional undercurrents of any room, squared his shoulders. "Just what, Victoria?" he asked softly.
Victoria flushed.
"I did not mean." "Yes, you did," David replied. "People always mean the things they try to swallow last minute." Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Daniel looked like he wished he could disappear. Mr. Sterling let the moment settle before he spoke again. "There is something you should know," he said, addressing both Daniel and Victoria now. "About how you are perceived at the company."
Daniel stiffened. "Sir."
"You have promise," Sterling began. "You are competent. But you have blind spots. Serious ones." Daniel swallowed. I do not understand." "You treat people differently based on what you think they can offer you."
Daniel's face twisted, defensive.
"That is not true." "It is true," Sterling said evenly, and tonight proved it. The room seemed to lean closer, though no one dared move. "Your mother," he continued, "is one of the most remarkable women I have met in my career. Someone with compassion, intelligence, and integrity. Yet you introduced her as if she were nothing. As if her worth depended on what she could do for you." Daniel's breathing quickened, humiliation rising to his eyes. "Sir, please. This is a misunderstanding." "No," Sterling replied. "This is a pattern." A chilling silence followed. Then David stepped forward. "Dad," he said gently, "maybe let me explain." Mr. Sterling nodded. David took a breath, then faced Daniel. "I remember you from school," he said quietly. "Not well, we were not close, but I remember you." Daniel blinked rapidly.
You do.
Yes, David said. You were the kid who always sat with the athletes. You made fun of anyone who did not fit into your version of cool. Kids like me.
Daniel's face strained.
You never said anything to me, David added. But you laughed when others did. You encouraged it by silence. I could see the memory striking my son painfully, as if someone had pushed him into a mirror he had never dared look into before. And now, David continued, you have done the same to your own mother. Diminished someone because you thought that elevating yourself required lowering someone else. Victoria suddenly looked uncomfortable, eyes darting around the room. The expression of someone realizing her husband's social currency was depreciating by the minute. I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had bitten my tongue. For years, I had shrunk so my son could feel tall. For years, I pretended I did not notice when I was treated like a shadow. But tonight I could not stay silent.
I stepped forward.
Daniel. He turned to me instantly, desperate for rescue, for explanation, for a way out of the humiliation unraveling around him. But I did not rescue him. Not this time. You took my sacrifices, I said softly, and built a life out of them. I cleaned houses, worked nights, skipped meals. Also you could have opportunities one never had. He blinked hard, eyes glassy. And I never minded, I continued. Because I wanted you to rise. I wanted you to succeed. I wanted you to be proud. A tear escaped his eye. But you were never ashamed of my sacrifices, I said.
You were ashamed of me.
He flinched. You introduced me as your housekeeper because that is what you wanted me to be, invisible, unimportant, forgettable. Someone who exists in service, not in identity. Mom, no, he whispered. Daniel, I said gently but firmly, I spent my whole life teaching you compassion. But somewhere along the way, you learned to trade compassion for status. His shoulders shook. And I love you, I said, because it was still true, painfully true, but love does not mean silence. The room was still.
Utterly still.
Even the chandelier seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. I did not plan to address this tonight, he said, voice steady, but given what we have all witnessed, I think it is necessary. Daniel waited, terrified. Your promotion, Sterling continued, will be postponed.
I heard Daniel suck in a breath.
Not permanently, the CEO added. But until you demonstrate consistent leadership built on empathy rather than ambition. Daniel looked devastated. But Sterling was not finished. As of next quarter, he added, you will participate in our community mentorship program, the same one your mother helped establish years ago.
Daniel's eyes widened.
You will work with underprivileged students. You will learn what real struggle looks like. And you will learn to value people for who they are, not what they can do for you. It was not punishment. It was transformation. The kind Daniel desperately needed. Victoria, on the other hand, was livid. You cannot do this, she hissed. Daniel has worked too hard. And his mother has worked harder, Sterling replied sharply. Yet she is not the one asking for recognition. Victoria had no comeback. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Mom, he whispered, voice cracking, I am sorry. I do not know when I became this person.
I stepped closer.
You can still choose who you become. He nodded, broken and humbled. And while forgiveness would not come instantly, I felt the first fragile thread of healing stitch itself into place. Not because he deserved forgiveness yet, but because I deserved peace. And for the first time in years, I felt it. That night did not end with a dramatic exit or slammed doors. Instead, it ended with something quieter.
Something heavier.
A sense that nothing would ever be quite the same again. Dinner resumed, though the mood had changed. People went back to their conversations, but every so often, I would feel their eyes drift toward me, toward Daniel, toward Mr. Sterling and David.
Not with pity.
Not with mockery. With curiosity. With something like respect. I sat at the main table, trying to blend in, but there is only so invisible you can be when your entire existence has just been pulled into the spotlight. I barely tasted the food. I smiled when spoken to. I made small talk about books and travel and the weather. But inside, my heart was sore and tired. After dessert, guests began trickling out into the foyer, some thanking Mr. Sterling, others shaking hands with executives, phones discreetly appearing as people requested drivers or checked the time. I slipped away to the back terrace for a moment of air. The night was cool, with a faint breeze that smelled like wet stone and gardenias. The city lights sparkled in the distance, blurred and soft behind the mansion's glass railing. For the first time that evening, I was alone. Or so I thought. You always did prefer the quiet spaces. I turned and found David standing in the doorway, a small smile on his face, his suit jacket loosened, his tie slightly undone. Some things do not change, I said gently. He walked out to join me, leaning lightly against the railing. Thank you, he said. For what? I asked, genuinely confused. For tonight, he replied. For being exactly who you have always been. People like you. You force the truth out of hiding, just by standing there and existing. I let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. I did not feel very strong tonight, if I am honest. You did not have to feel strong, he said. You just had to be honest. That has always been enough. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he asked, Can I send you something? Of course. He opened his phone, typed for a moment, then looked back at me. I have a new book coming out in a few months, he said. It is a collection of essays about teachers, actually. About the people who shaped me. I wrote about you. My breath stilled. You wrote about me? He nodded. And if you are comfortable with it, I would like to send you an advance copy.
Maybe even dedicate the book to you. Emotion pressed up, tight and hot behind my eyes.
I do not know what to say, I whispered. Say yes, he replied simply. So I did. Yes. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement through the glass. Daniel. He stood just inside the doorway, half hidden by the curtains, watching us. His shoulders were slumped, his expression strained. He had the look of someone realizing the universe did not revolve around him. Someone really seeing, his own reflection for the first time. David left a few minutes later to say goodbye to another guest, squeezing my hand once before he went. I stayed where I was, knowing Daniel was still there. Finally, he stepped outside. For a moment, he did not say anything. He just stood next to me, staring out at the city, his hands shoved into his pockets like he used to do as a teenager when he had done something wrong and did not know how to fix it. Mom, he said quietly, can we talk? I nodded.
We are talking.
He let out a shaky breath. I messed up, he said. Badly. Yes, I answered, not cruelly. Just truthfully. You did. His voice cracked. I do not even know why I said it like that. Just our housekeeper. The second it left my mouth, I felt smaller. I offered. He nodded, shame flooding his eyes. I thought, he said slowly, struggling to find the words, that if I made everything look perfect, if I looked successful, put together, in control, my bosses would respect me more. I was scared that if they knew where I came from, if they knew you worked as a housekeeper now, they would see me as less. I studied his face. This man I had once held as a baby, whose little fingers had clung to mine, whose tears I had wiped away after bad dreams and scraped knees. Daniel, I said gently, do you think there is shame in honest work? He shook his head quickly. No. No, of course not. You just did not want them to associate you with it, I finished. He flinched, the truth hitting him harder than any accusation. I am so proud of you, I continued softly. Not because of your job, or your salary, or where you live. I am proud because I know what it took for you to get here. But I wish. My voice trembled. I wish you were proud of me too. His face crumpled. I am, he choked out. I am proud of you. I do not think I ever knew how to show it without feeling small. Like if I admitted how much you gave up for me, it would mean I did not build my life myself. I shook my head. Success is not a solo project, I said. And neither is character. He looked at me, eyes red. Can you forgive me? Forgiveness is a strange thing. People think it is one grand gesture, one magical moment where everything resets and pain disappears. But real forgiveness is slower, quieter. A series of small decisions to let go of bitterness, one day at a time. I can start, I said honestly. I cannot promise the hurt will vanish overnight. But I can promise to try. He swallowed hard. That is more than I deserve. He wiped his face, then glanced back toward the house. Dad, I mean Mr. Sterling, he is going to think I am an idiot. Maybe, I said, and his eyes snapped to mine. But he will also see what you do next.
What I do next?
Yes, I said. You are not defined by one terrible moment. You are defined by what you learn from it. We left not long after. Victoria barely spoke in the car. She sat rigid in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, her jaw tight. At one point she muttered, "This is going to spread," under her breath. Maybe it should, I replied quietly from the back seat. She glanced at me through the rearview mirror, surprised that I had spoken. People should know, I continued, that titles do not always equal character. Maybe that will help some of them grow. She looked away. When we got back to their house, I unbuckled my seatbelt slowly, my body aching from the emotional weight of the evening. I will clean up upstairs before bed, I began out of habit. But Daniel turned in his seat, eyes earnest. No, he said. You are not cleaning anything tonight. I blinked, startled. You are our guest, he added quietly. You should have been all along. His voice broke a little on that last line. I nodded once, not trusting my own voice. Inside, the house felt different. Not in the way it looked, but in the way it held us. The walls that had once felt like they were closing me in now simply stood there, waiting. I am going to check on the kids, I said. I walked down the hall, stepping into the bedroom where my granddaughter slept sprawled across her little bed, curls scattered over the pillow. She had no idea what had happened that night. No idea her family had cracked open and rearranged itself. I brushed a strand of hair from her face. Please, I whispered, grow up kinder than the world teaches you to be. Behind me, I heard footsteps.
Daniel stood in the doorway, watching.
I do not want her to grow up and be ashamed of us, he said quietly. Then give her something to be proud of, I told him. He nodded slowly. I will. Time passed. Not much at first. Just a few weeks. But in those weeks, small things changed. Daniel began calling more. Not to ask for favors. Not to see if I could help out with something. Just to talk. He would ask, "What were your students like?" Or, "Do you remember any of the books you taught that made the kids come alive?" Sometimes we would stay on the phone for an hour, talking about narratives and character arcs and the way stories quietly shape people who do not even realize they are being shaped. He started his assignment with the mentorship program soon after. At first, he hated it. "These kids do not listen," he complained one night. "They are late. They are distracted. They have attitude." I listened patiently. "Do they remind you of anyone?" I asked. He frowned. "Who?" "You," I said. "With nicer sneakers." He laughed in spite of himself. As the weeks went by, his tone changed. He started telling me about a boy who reminded him of David, brilliant, anxious, constantly apologizing for existing. About a girl who wrote poetry in the margins of her math worksheets. About a student who showed up hungry and fell asleep halfway through a workshop because he had not eaten since the day before. "It is not fair," Daniel said one night. "They did not ask for any of this." "No one ever does," I replied. He went quiet. Bit by bit, I watched my son soften around the edges. Not become weak. Become human. One afternoon, a few months after the dinner incident, I received an email from Mr. Sterling's office. They were hosting a launch event for a new initiative, a scholarship and mentorship fund for underprivileged students. The email read, "We would be honored if you would attend as a special guest. In fact, if you are comfortable, we would like you to say a few words." I stared at the screen, hands trembling. Me. Speak. I had spoken in classrooms, in PTA meetings, at tiny community events no one remembered. But this was different. This was a room full of executives, donors, community leaders, and my son.
For a moment, the old fear bubbled up.
What if I did not belong there? What if my dress was not fancy enough, my words not polished enough? Then I remembered the boy who had hugged me at that dinner and said, "You changed my life." I hit reply. I would be honored to attend. And yes, I will speak. The venue was smaller than the mansion, but just as elegant. A modern hall with soft lighting, sleek chairs, a small stage at the front. When I arrived, I saw banners with the program's name and photos of students participating in workshops, smiling, writing, presenting. On one of the posters, I saw Daniel. He was leaning over a table, helping a teen write something on a notepad. His expression was gentle, focused. My chest tightened with pride. He noticed me from across the room, excused himself from a conversation, and hurried over. "You came," he said, almost breathless. "You invited me," I replied. He laughed a little. "I was not sure you would say yes." "Neither was I admitted. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You look beautiful, Mom." I glanced down at my simple dark green dress, the same pair of low heels I had worn at the dinner months ago. But coming from him, it felt like wearing something entirely new. "Thank you," I said. As guests began to sit, Mr. Sterling took the stage and welcomed everyone. He spoke about the company's responsibility to the community, about leveling the playing field, about recognizing unseen potential. And then he said, "There is someone here tonight without whom this program would not exist. Someone who taught my son, and indirectly taught me, the meaning of compassion and integrity. I would like to invite her to the stage, Ms. Eleanor Hayes." My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I walked up the steps one at a time, the room blurring slightly around the edges. At the podium, I looked out. Mr. Sterling. David, seated in the front row, smiling at me. Students. Executives. And there, near the middle, Daniel, eyes shining with something I had longed to see. Pride. I took a breath and began. "I spent almost 3 decades of my life as a teacher," I said. "Not because it paid well. Not because it was easy. But because I believed that if you give a child the chance to find their voice, they will change the world in ways you cannot predict." I told them about the students who had doubted themselves. The ones who grew up in chaos. The ones who had been told they were too much, too little, too strange, too quiet. "I have worked with kids who showed up hungry," I continued. Kids who hid their essays because they were afraid someone would laugh at them. Kids who did not believe in their own ideas. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "And I have watched a lot of adults forget where they came from," I added. "Forget that they, too, were once young and unsure. Forget that someone somewhere took the time to believe in them." I did not mention my son. Not by name. Not directly. But I did not need to. He knew. I knew. That was enough. "This program," I said, gesturing toward the banner, "is not charity. Charity suggests that we are giving something extra. This is justice. This is balance. This is saying, we see you. We know you have potential. And we refuse to let circumstances bury it." I thought of the night at the mansion, of being called just our housekeeper. "I have had many titles in my life," I said softly. "Teacher. Mother. Widow. Housekeeper. Each of those roles has dignity, because dignity does not come from the title. It comes from the heart behind it."
I let my gaze move slowly across the room.
"If you remember nothing else from me," I finished, "remember this. Never be ashamed of the people who helped you become who you are. Never be ashamed of the hands that lifted you up, even if those hands are rough and worn. Because if you are lucky, one day, someone will say that about you." When I stepped away from the microphone, the room was quiet for a beat. And then applause. Not polite.
Not obligatory.
Full. Warm.
Real.
After the event, people came up to speak with me. Some shared their own stories about parents who had worked 2 jobs, grandparents who had sacrificed everything, teachers who had changed their lives. I listened. I smiled. I hugged strangers who did not feel like strangers. And then Daniel approached. This time, he did not look ashamed. He did not look like a man trying to outrun his past. He looked steady. "Mom," he said, "there is someone I would like you to meet." My heart tightened, a flash of that old fear, "Please do not let it be like last time," crossing my mind. But he led me toward a small group of executives, people he worked with closely. As we reached them, he placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "This," he said clearly, "is my mother, Eleanor Hayes. She is the reason I am standing where I am today. She was a teacher for nearly 30 years and helped inspire this entire program." There it was. The introduction I had never needed but always deserved. One of the executives smiled and shook my hand. "It is an honor to meet you," she said. "We have heard so much about you." I glanced at Daniel, surprised. "You have?" I asked. He nodded, flushing slightly. "I have been talking about you a lot," he admitted. "I figured it was time everyone knew where I really came from." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread across my chest. "Thank you," I said quietly. He leaned in and whispered, "No, Mom. Thank you." Life did not magically become perfect after that. I still lived in my small apartment.
My hands still ached.
I still helped out with my grandchildren some days. I still cooked and folded laundry and grocery shopped. But something fundamental had changed. Not in the tasks I did. In the way I was seen. Daniel stopped introducing me as someone who worked for him. He introduced me as someone he came from. He began bringing his daughter to my place not because it was convenient, but because he wanted her to know my world, to hear my stories, to see old photos, to understand that her life was built on the shoulders of people who had loved fiercely and given quietly. Sometimes on Sunday afternoons, he would come over alone, no kids, no wife, just him, and we would drink tea and talk. Really talk. About the past. About who he wanted to become. About the parts of himself he was not proud of, and the parts he was finally ready to grow. We were not perfect. We were not healed overnight. But we were trying. And that mattered. Months later, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a book. On the cover. The Quiet Architects, How Teachers Build Human Beings.
By David Sterling.
My heart swelled. I opened the book and flipped to the first page. There, printed in clean black ink, was the dedication.
For Ms. Eleanor Hayes.
Who taught me that stories are not just something we read, but something we become.
I pressed my fingers to the words, tears blurring the page.
The phone rang. It was Daniel. "Have you checked the news?" he asked. "No," I said. "Should I?" He chuckled. "There is an article about the scholarship fund. They talked about the program, about the event, about you. They called you the heart behind the initiative." "That is very kind," I replied softly. "It is not just kind," he said. "It is true." There was a pause. "Mom." "Yes. I know I said it before, but I am going to keep saying it until you believe me." "Say what?" I asked. "I am proud of you." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle into places I did not realize were still empty. "Thank you, Daniel." If you are still listening to this story, if you have made it all the way to this moment, then I want to speak to you directly, not as a character in a story, but as a voice in your ear. Maybe you are someone who has been overlooked. Someone whose work is invisible until it is not done. Someone who has been labeled by a role instead of seen as a full human being. Maybe you are just a cleaner. Just a cashier.
Just a receptionist.
Just a parent who stays home. Just someone people glance past. I want you to hear this. There is no just about you. You are the sum of everything you have survived, everything you have given, everything you have carried quietly so others would not have to. And if there is someone in your life you have taken for granted, someone whose sacrifices you have conveniently folded into the background of your success, maybe it is time to call them. To thank them. To introduce them proudly.
To say, this is not just my housekeeper, my driver, my nanny, my mother, my father.
This is the person who made me possible. And if you are the one carrying the weight, do not let anyone tell you that you are less because of the job you do or the clothes you wear or the address you live at. Your worth is not defined by your title. It is defined by your heart. If this story made you think of someone in your own life, if it reminded you of a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, a neighbor, or someone who worked behind the scenes to lift you up, tell me about them. Scroll down and leave a comment. Share who they are. Share what they did. Say the thank you that maybe you have not had the courage or the chance to say out loud yet. And if you want to hear more stories like this about ordinary people, quiet sacrifices, messy families, and the complicated ways we hurt and heal each other, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story. I am Eleanor. And this was the night my son introduced me as just our housekeeper. Only for his boss and the world to find out who I truly was.